world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Tuesday, February 24th, as I am recording this. Now I'm going to try to get this hurried up and recorded because the State of the Union is going to be starting soon. Recording this later in the day than I had kind of hoped. The day has kind of gotten away from me. Even though I was off work today, I thought I'd have more time to record more things, but with my work schedule the last few days and some other things going on, it just really didn't happen. Now, getting this recorded, and then I'm going to watch the State of the Union, and during the State of the Union, I may end up jumping in over on TikTok. Our friend Trucker T is going live, or at least said he was going to go live. And I don't know if the Rational Boomer is going to do a live before, during, or after. He might, maybe either on TikTok or Substack or something. So we'll see if he goes live, and maybe I'll jump into his as well. But anyway, we got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about. Now, going forward, kind of give you an idea for the week. Going to do this. I'm going to watch the State of the Union, and then in the early morning hours, most of tomorrow's podcast is going to be talking about the State of the Union and his address and what it is and everything else. So that's kind of what that's going to be. Also going to see about maybe being a guest on the Boomer podcast as well. Maybe tomorrow, Wednesday, maybe Thursday. Both days work out real well for me. I don't know how they would work out for Mike. So if I do either one of those nights, I would end up being probably on either Thursday or Friday, Thursday morning, or maybe Friday morning, depending on what he has for guests. Might do that. And I'm also considering doing either a TikTok or a YouTube live one of these nights as the podcast as well. So those are some things to look forward to. Now we are looking ahead at the State of the Union, which is going to be starting shortly. Now, I kind of wondered if he was going to end up actually doing the State of the Union. He is not required by the Constitution to actually appear before a joint session of Congress, like has been the tradition. Now, most modern presidents, I think, pretty much since the TV era, have done this as an address to Congress and the nation. But he's not required to. All the Constitution says about it is from time to time that the president is supposed to give an address about the State of the Union to Congress. Now, some presidents, including Thomas Jefferson and a few others, decided instead of going to Congress, they would just send them a letter. Now, no one is probably surprised to find out that the writer, Thomas Jefferson, chose a letter. And for some of you out there, the first image that's going to come to mind is not our actual founding father, but his portrayal from the musical Hamilton. And as awesome as Hamilton is, no, that was not exactly how our founding father was. But anyway, funny little aside, it also popped into my head whenever I think of Thomas Jefferson now. I think of the musical Hamilton, maybe not as an accurate representation, but it just gives me a good chuckle. Now, with the State of the Union, what can we expect from Donald Trump? Well, I think he's going to come out of the gate and he's going to be, fired up initially, because I think they are giving him something to get him fired up. And the longer he goes, the worse he's probably going to start to sound, which is typical Donald Trump. Now, I was wrong earlier, a few days ago. I think I said that The State of the Union was 7 p.m. Eastern. It is 9 p.m. Eastern, which is in Donald Trump's prime sundowning time. And we have got multiple issues with him sundowning where he posts weird shit on Truth Social. He comes out and he says random things. Um, so there may be a little bit of that. We'll have to see what he says during the State of the Union and to see how much random, weird, bonkers stuff he actually says. Now, Donald Trump is going to be addressing a joint session of Congress. Now, typically, there will be at least one member of his cabinet, and I don't know who it is this year, but they are what is called the designated survivor. Now, what the designated survivor is because of what the State of the Union address is. You have the president, you have the vice president, you have the Speaker of the House, you have the president pro tem of the Senate, and the majority of his cabinet all in one location. Now, should an event happen that would disrupt that or take the lives of everybody there, there needs to be somebody in the line of succession that is able to become president. And every year they designate one cabinet position to stay behind. Basically, they are in a secure location somewhere else, typically watching it on TV. And for the 2 hours, hour and a half, whatever length of time that everybody is in the Capitol, that designated survivor is secured away, basically, just in case. Now, there's never been a need or a call for that designated survivor to take the presidency. However, uh, it is a precaution that they take every year. So Donald Trump is going to be giving this address, and all eyes are going to be on him. Now, I kind of wondered if he was going to back off on it, if he was going to avoid going to the State of the Union. Um, and if he was going to do something like show up on screen, have it be pre-recorded, um, have it be some kind of other production to where they could make it and enhance it with AI and make him look better. But the more I think about it, and the closer we get to the start of that State of the Union, I think he is going to absolutely end up uh, being there and doing it in person because he wants the adulation and the admiration. Now, not every member of Congress is going, and they're doing like the real State of the Union or the State of the Swamp or the alternative State of the Union or something like that is what they're calling it. Now, I'm divided on this whole counter program um, thing. It is basically an alternative to Donald Trump's State of the Union because they say he's going to lie his way through, which is something you can expect. You can expect Donald Trump to lie. He's going to tell us how great the economy is. He's going to talk about how great his immigration policies are. I bet you he mentions that gas prices are down. He's going to talk about how his inflation prices are working. He's going to be talking about how we're respected worldwide, and he's probably going to whine about the tariffs, and he's going to be lying about a lot of it. But this counter program is supposedly going to be talking about the real facts of the immigration and the economy and everything else and countering what Donald Trump is saying. Now, one of the reasons why I don't know what to think about this is because it is similar to the MAGAs having their own meltdown and having their own halftime show. Now, you could say it's different because, well, Donald Trump's going to lie his way through the State of the Union. Then don't watch. I guess that's part of where of how I feel on it. Um, but this idea of let's just do a counter thing, it's not something that has been done before. And just because something has never been done before doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But at the same point, it is going to be something that the right is going to point at and say, "Well, see, you guys were such snowflakes." They're not going to see the irony, right? They're not going to understand that we're doing the same thing that, or those that were doing it are doing the same thing that they did with their own version of a halftime show. They don't understand nuance, they don't understand comparison, and they don't understand things like that. And if we're doing it to make fun of them, they're not going to understand that either, because Donald Trump makes fun of them to their face and they clap and cheer like, oh, a bunch of idiots. Now, Donald Trump has said to his supporters in front of crowds, "Oh, I love the poorly educated," to raucous applause. And they don't understand that he's insulting them, that he thinks he's better than them. He thinks it's a compliment because they look at education, as far as having a college degree, as something to be ashamed of, or it's just indoctrination, something to be scared of, things like that. Now, one of the reasons why the right is so hopped up against education, well, there's a couple reasons. One, typically people who are educated don't lean conservative. They realize that conservative policies don't work. You take a few economics classes, for example, and suddenly you realize trickle down economics has never worked and it will never work, and you understand the reasons why, and you don't want to try it. Beyond that, and I know people in my own life, and I don't have friends as well as a personal experience with this comment, that once they had gotten some education, and I am pretty much not religious, uh, basically non-practicing of any denomination. Um, I have my own beliefs and things, and I don't typically get into that. But ever since, I grew up in a very religious household, and I went to a private college, or a private high school, I should say. I went to Catholic education, and after I went to college, and I got some higher learning. Um, and it wasn't just the college. There were other life expectancies and life things that happened in between that happened. And eventually I realized that organized religion really wasn't for me. And I had some family members ask me straight up, well, now that you've had, education, do you think you're too smart for God? And it wasn't about the education. But people on the right, I've had friends that have had almost identical situations happen to them, where they experienced the real world once they got out of their small town. Some coming from smaller towns than I've lived in. And when I talk small towns, for some of them, you're talking about towns with, hundreds of people total. There's a stop sign, blink and you miss it type deal. Um, but once they experienced the real world outside of that area, and they had some experiences, they were pretty much a once a year, go on the holidays type and the holy days type religious person that you see. They come back and they go through the motions for their family, but they don't actually believe anymore. And I've seen that question, and they've told me they've had that question where, what do you think? You're too smart for God? And usually it's not that. But the reason the right doesn't like education is, one, they connect the two, right? Because when you go to college, you have experiences outside of your, you know, tight knit community. You realize things about people, and you get around people you would never experience. Um, and your perspective on things change. I grew up in a town that was like 90 to 95% people who looked like me. And I did not grow up in a town where diversity was a thing. It really wasn't a thing in my town. You had certain families that were diverse, some through adoption, where they had adopted outside of, you know, They didn't look. The parents looked like me, but the kids did not. Um, for those of you listening on Spotify, I think you know what I mean here. Um, and then you had like, the family that ran the local Mexican restaurant, the family that owned the Chinese restaurant. Actually, there were two Chinese restaurants, but that kind of thing. That was typically like there wasn't a lot of diversity. But once you got to college and you started experiencing it and you got out in the real world, that whole perspective and that whole thing changed, right? Like you start realizing that even if you didn't know you had those perceptions, you had them. You had something, you didn't, like, I never considered myself to be a racist person. You know, it didn't bother me at all. However, I found at 18, 19 years old when I got out and I was living in college and I was living in a large city and we had all kinds of races. I found out that that confirmed what I already thought. It didn't bother me at all. I had friends of every uh, race around me, didn't matter. But I started noticing other people's reactions and I saw some prejudices and things firsthand, and it was jarring, really. But people, the right, they have this adverse idea to education because you get out of your comfort zone, you get these experiences, and suddenly you realize that the shell they live in this bubble they live in, is really, really small. Like I know uh, people who have grown up around me, in the town that I currently reside in. And when I'm talking to them, I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast here, that, you know, they barely go outside of town, right? They talk about going, and we're not far from Des Moines. It's close enough that you could get there, spend a few hours, and get back and not ruin most of your day, depending on how what you need to get done, etc. But we're not, it's not overly far away. But they reacted like Des Moines is this huge city. Des Moines has, I think, top end, I think 150, maybe 200,000 people. If you count everything, because it's a sprawling mass, and it's the biggest city in Iowa. But compare that to some other places in this country, and it's nothing. The Chicagoland area holds like, I think it's 9 million people in the Chicagoland area. Des Moines got, nothing by comparison. And but people get down there, from this area, they're like, "Oh, Des Moines, it's too scary. It's too much traffic. It's too big. It's too this. It's too that." And I'm like, it's no big deal. But we have people in this area who have spent their whole lives pretty much in this cocoon, in this bubble. They don't get out. They don't go. They rarely travel. Um, and you got these Republicans that don't know, um, a lot about the world. And Donald Trump loves it. That's kind of where I kind of lost where I was going with this. But he loves the uneducated, the poorly educated, as he calls them, because he can say whatever and they don't have the natural curiosity to go complete deep dive and fact check. Or they're the other type of MAGA supporter who does their own research, but they don't understand what research is. For example, if they're talking about something crappy about the vaccine, and they got this weird conspiracy theory that it causes whatever, and Donald Trump wants credit for the COVID vaccine, of course. But then his supporters don't want to take it because they've got all kinds of reasons as to why not. Well, they've got all their reasons. They could look through 100 websites. 99 of them would tell you vaccine is perfectly safe. Doesn't matter what we're talking about or for what, as far as which vaccine. But they would say that they could find 99 pages that all say the vaccine is perfectly safe, any vaccine they're talking about. But they could find one that backs up their claim. And suddenly that's the one they trust, that's the one they point to, and then we're all dumb for believing the other 99. Donald Trump and the poorly educated, they don't dig deep into anything. And one of the other things I've noticed with them is if he will say something, they believe it, right? And a lot of us on the left, we've been wondering for a while why they believe whatever he says. Well, the thing with that is they put a lot of weight into the fact that he is and has been the president of the United States. So, because he's the president, they say, well, clearly he must know something that we don't know because he's the president. And I've heard him say it, and one of the things that got me thinking about was I know people on in my own life that if a certain person, because they hold a particular job or they are related in a certain way, would say, well, why would that person lie to me? So clearly they must be telling me the truth. For example, when it comes to something of religion or whatever, well, my local priest told me blah, blah, blah. Clearly it must be true. And if it's not religion based, but if it's something else, like pretend maybe they were asking for guidance on something about abortion rights or Roe v. Wade or something. Well, the priest says this. Well, if the priest tells them that it is, of what's going on, for example, that, some people I've seen with Roe v. Wade actually believe that a woman would wait until 39 weeks and 4 days and decide she doesn't want to be pregnant anymore and doesn't want that baby, when she's days away from being due, and that with no medical reason behind it, that doctors are just perfectly okay granting an abortion. And they're not. But if a priest told them that, I know several people who would say, well, the priest told me that it's got to be true. They don't understand, or they wouldn't think of the fact that the priest might be lying to them or misinformed themselves or trying to point out something for an agenda. MAGA is um, a problem, right? Like they don't believe things because they're true. They believe them a lot of times based on who tells them. And if it's coming from Donald Trump because he is the president and has been the president, they will believe him above anybody else because he is in that position. And clearly he must know more than what the rest of us would because, they think that he has some kind of special knowledge. Now, what's going to happen with this State of the Union tonight here in a few hours? Donald Trump is going to come out. We've kind of talked about what he's going to do. It's going to probably sound like a rally speech because he doesn't know how to give anything but rally speeches. And he's going to probably embarrass himself and us. Now, what we could hope for is that he has some kind of major event during the speech. And things I'm going to be watching for when I consider a major event, is he going to be slumping more than normal? Is he going to be staggering? Is his face going to droop? Is he going to start slurring his speech? Is he going to start sounding crazy and demented and start saying a whole bunch of weird stuff? Because we're getting into the time frame of when he would be normally sundowning. Now, I expect them to give him something to keep him hopped up. Most State of the Unions go about an hour. I think the longest one, is around an hour and a half, which is Donald Trump, I think, during his first term. But he goes ahead and he's going to be out there, and I fully expect he's going to lie. He's going to lie through his teeth. He is going to try to divert and distract. And I don't expect that he is going to be saying much about the Epstein files. We will see if he talks about them at all, about people being brought to justice. Now, there was um, a news article I saw going around, at least from a couple different things. It got picked up a little bit, and it sounds like it was bogus, but it also sounds like something Donald Trump would say when talking about Prince Andrew. That he says it's a shame and that the Queen should pardon him. Well, the first part, I believe he probably did say that it is a shame that Andrew has been arrested. Him saying that the Queen should pardon him, that part doesn't seem like Donald Trump, because I think he is at least acutely aware, or at least partially aware, unless the dementia has gotten to him, that Charles is king and Queen Elizabeth passed on a few years ago. But the problem with stories like that, and this is why I try to fact check some of what I say, is because it sounds good, right? You see an article, and even if it's coming from a news source you like, if it sounds too good to be true, but it makes Donald Trump look like an idiot, it's like, oh man, this is great. I should run with this story. And I don't like doing that because if it turns out to not be true, then I look like a dumbass for talking about it. Now, Donald Trump's got a bad week coming up. He's got to give the State of the Union here in a little while. The State of the Union address is going to be bad enough on him. It is going to be taxing. And then I think it's either tomorrow and Thursday, or it's Thursday and Friday. Um, the Clintons are both testifying in front of Congress, one day, one the next. And they are testifying about the Epstein stuff. Donald Trump, he might talk about them testifying tonight at the State of the Union, um, but he's got to be worried because what do they know? And we know that Bill Clinton has been uh, at least sort of linked to Epstein, that they were at least in the same locations at several times. There's been no evidence so far saying that he has ever committed any atrocities with children. But what does he know? Was he around, and did he overhear things about other people doing things with children, etc.? So Donald Trump might be worried about what Bill Clinton has to say about the Epstein files. And if he's worried about it, that's, you know, could rain on his parade for the rest of the week. Beyond that, we are still waiting. I thought there might have been a Supreme Court decision out today. I have not seen anything on it. Maybe there will be one tomorrow. Now they are waiting on a decision on birthright citizenship. And Donald Trump has been trying to change birthright citizenship. What he wants to do is he wants to make it so you have to be a child of uh, citizen parents that are born and be born here. Um, and there's other requirements to get citizenship, where it's not just automatic because you were born here. Now, he always claims other countries do not do birthright citizenship, and that, of course, is a lie. A lot of countries do. I know Canada, the UK, and not North Korea, South Korea are several of the ones I know that do birthright citizenship. In fact, to help somebody I knew, or as research for somebody I knew, or that I do know, I should say, who was worried about what could happen with um, Donald Trump, I looked into South Korean citizenship a little bit and what it would take to reestablish it, for somebody who had it but lost it due to varying reasons. And apparently, it could be rather straightforward, and there would be a way to get that citizenship back because, yet by birth, they were a South Korean citizen. Um, so we are not the only country that uses it, despite what Donald Trump says. But he says a lot of things that just end up not being true. And he's probably going to talk about birthright citizenship at the State of the Union tonight. But we are waiting for that decision from the Supreme Court, and I don't think they are going to decide with Donald Trump on this. Now, the problem is this should be an easy 9-0 decision, and it's probably going to be something like 6-3, 7-2, something like that, when it really shouldn't. The 14th Amendment, I believe, says any person born in the United States is a citizen of the United States and the state in which they reside. Sounds pretty straightforward to me, but Donald Trump has this other idea or this other interpretation. Now, his whole legal strategy is waiting or in trying to get things in front of a judge that would see things his way and side with him. He doesn't have an actual plan beyond that. It is just, well, if I get it in front of the right judge, they'll see it my way. Then once they rule, I'm going to be golden. So Donald Trump has got a lot of things to watch out for in this, State of the Union. He's going and the upcoming week afterward. Now he could end up taking a lot of heat because of the State of the Union, depending on what he says and what he does. If it goes as bad as it could, he gets negative press in the media. Expect him to come out and do a full-on social media blitz. Now, I'm also curious to see what he does uh, in the morning hours tomorrow morning to see how ladies up sundowning um, and how tomorrow goes because they threw his schedule off because he was up doing this event much later at night than he normally is. Now, when I talk about Donald Trump and sundowning, one of the things we talk about is the stuff he shares on Truth Social. Now, one of the things he shared the other day, uh, which was something else completely unhinged, is it's an AI generated video of Donald Trump in his normal suit and tie, but edited into the video of the 2026 U.S. men's hockey team, where we beat Canada. And he's edited into the video and he's skating and he's helping them win the gold medal. And the whole thing is ridiculous. And he shares it like he's some big hero. And of course, MAGA's probably eating it up. Now, he has invited both the U.S. men's and women's hockey teams, who both won gold, to the White House. Now, I think the uh, men's team, has accepted and the women's declined. So, of course, we're going to hear about that probably tonight at the State of the Union. But we will see how that all happens, right? What he does with that. But the fact that he's sharing these weird things that make him out to look like some larger than life hero is Donald Trump. Like that is who he is. That's how he thinks right now. He is so focused on his legacy and being remembered that he's doing a lot of things trying to make sure his name goes down in history, that he is always remembered. And that tells me, I think, that his time is short, that he knows he is down to the wire here, that he may not make it to the end of his term. Now, he's going to keep putting up this brave front as long as he possibly can, because that is what people like him do. Okay? They come up from a spot of um, the strength. They don't want to be looked at as weak or anything like that. They don't want to be embarrassed. So he could be on his deathbed with minutes left in the middle of hospice, and he's going to come out and say he feels like he's 15 and he can do anything, no matter how bad he really feels. That is just the type of person he is. He's not doing it to be um, to deflect and have people not worry about him or anything like that. It's because his own ego won't let him actually be the type of, come off as being sickly or ill or anything like that. Now, uh, all right. Now, one of the stories we have been watching and we've been talking about has been this story about Representative Neil Dunn of Florida. Neil Dunn had been rumored to be resigning early. Now, there's a reason why I said rumored all the time when we were talking about it and about what could happen with him resigning. Now, we had heard that Representative Dunn was not in the best of health. And that was one of the reasons why he was retiring. Well, he is retiring from Congress at the end of this term, but it sounds like, at least for now, he is not leaving. He is going to stay, going to try to hold things out until he gets to the end of his term. And part of the reason is it is because they are so close in the House of Representatives right now. There are a grand total of 218 Republicans in the House of Representatives. If Neil Dunn had retired and resigned his seat, that would bring it down to 217. With the outstanding seats that are open, if the Democrats had picked up all four, they would have the means to be in control of the chamber. So, Republican establishment and Speaker of the House Mike Johnson had been talking to Representative Dunn, trying to convince him to not retire. And now it sounds like it worked. So he's not retiring early, at least not yet. Now that could change if his health is not great, which it sounds like it's not, and his health takes a turn, he may end up still resigning. And if something else happens and other members of Congress resign or flip parties or something, and the Democrats still end up in control, maybe he resigns because it doesn't matter at that point. So for right now, what could have been the deciding seat for control of the House of Representatives is not flipping, is not leaving because Neil Dunn is staying. Now, this does not really change the math for the um, upcoming midterm elections. I still think the Democrats can take the House by 30 or 40 seats. So there is something there. Now, one of the other stories we've been talking about was this Supreme Court decision involving Donald Trump and his tariffs, where they got overturned. Now, today is the day, supposedly, that Donald Trump's 15% tariffs worldwide on every country on every good is going to take effect. This is him throwing a temper tantrum because his tariffs were overturned. They found another law that might work, except for the fact that they already argued before the Supreme Court that the primary justification for this secondary law did not apply and that it was something else they were trying to do when it came to implementing those tariffs that the Supreme Court ultimately overrode. So this will probably get challenged in court, might even get tossed out, probably would get tossed out. But Speaker of the House Mike Johnson was asked point blank because this 15% tariff Donald Trump wants to put on is only good for 150 days and then would require Congress to approve it to stay. And if he wants to go anything above 15% or to change anything or to go back on some of these deals he has talked about and put through, 50%, 75% tariffs, or like he had on China, or he tried to put on China, ultimately turned out to be unconstitutional. Well, I think it was 235 or 255% at one point. And they are, if they want to go that high, Congress would have to act. Well, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson was asked about that possibility. And he basically said they don't have the votes. They don't have the votes in Congress to take up his tariffs and actually pass it. So Donald Trump is probably tonight going to, at the State of the Union, going to be talking about trying to do it, but they don't have the votes in Congress. Because Republicans know, as we are looking at the midterms, that they are in trouble for keeping their seats, and that they will need to end up not wrecking the economy if they want to have a chance at getting reelected. Now, something else Donald Trump is probably going to bring up in the State of the Union is the SAVE Act. And the SAVE Act is this piece of legislation that is changing or trying to change how voting works in this country. Now, how voting works is defined from state to state. But what Donald Trump is trying to do and what Republicans are trying to do is exactly what I said they were going to do. They are trying to confuse the two situations. Because I see MAGA posters and commenters coming all the time and posting things like, well, imagine being so scared of a voter ID that you have to fight against it. If you have to have an ID, clearly you can't win, or if you have to fight against ID, clearly you can't win, or something like that. Well, here's the thing. There are multiple things wrong with the SAVE Act. So let's get into it. First of all, requiring a voter ID, requiring any form of an ID that you must pay for to vote essentially becomes a poll tax. Poll taxes are illegal. You are not allowed to charge a tax to vote. So requiring us to go get an ID is a poll tax. Now, one of the comments you see all the time from MAGA when we start talking about this is, well, you need an ID to go get a bank account. You need an ID a lot of times to start a job. You need an ID for this and for that. And whilst a lot of that is true, you don't, to do those things, it is not a constitutionally protected right where it is spelled out in the amendments that says you cannot charge a fee or a tax to do that. Beyond that, there are ways to survive without an ID. You say, well, you need an ID to drive. I know tons of people who drive on suspended licenses. Doesn't make it right, but they do it. I also know other people who have had a suspended license or never had a license, and they get by living close to where they work. Worked with one guy for multiple years. I worked with him for 5, 6 years, 7 years, something like that, maybe more. And while he had a license, he didn't have a vehicle, but he lived a block and a half away from where we worked. He walked every day, no matter the weather. You find ways to make it happen if you don't have those things. As far as getting a bank account, I know multiple people, and myself included, for a period of time where I did not have a bank account. Didn't need one. I was operating purely on cash because I was having trouble getting a bank account open for credit reasons mostly. Got that dealt with. But the problem became I just didn't need a bank account. Now, I had an idea I could have opened one that way, but that wasn't the problem. But I survived for a few years without one. You can make do. Um, there's all kinds of ways to get by without an ID. The other thing is, like here in Iowa, there are alternative ways to identify yourself. You can bring in certain pieces of mail are considered proof of ID. You can do you could have somebody attest to who you are and swear an affidavit saying you are that person. Things like that. There are other ways of proving your identity to go vote. Now, the other problem with this voter ID thing is and MAGA believes that if they pass voter ID, it's going to simply be, well, you show up with your state issued driver's license and you're allowed to vote. But if you read the actual bill, and we know MAGA doesn't read bills, they listen to talking heads on Fox News, or they listen to people like Donald Trump or other Republican candidates and lawmakers, and they all say what these people want to hear. But if you Um, if they enact voter ID laws, a lot of times what is required is not on your state issued driver's license. For example, the ID they're talking about in the SAVE Act is one that would have your citizenship status on it. My ID doesn't have that. I was just looking at it the other day, trying to figure out when it expired because couldn't remember how many years it was. I figured it had to be getting close, but I was off by a couple yet because they had changed how many years you renewed it for. They made it more expensive, but it lasts longer, so I was okay with it. But whatever. But it doesn't have anything about citizenship status. So by the SAVE Act law, that would not be good enough. And then there is a requirement in there that your birth certificate and your ID, your voter ID, must match. Well, if you've been married and now you've taken your name, you've taken your spouse's name, and for some reasons, now this would majorly affect women, but some men who change their name when they get married, um, their birth certificate would no longer match unless they went and got an updated document. But I don't know if that's actually, I don't know how that works when it comes to birth certificates and name changes with marriage, if they would reissue you a new birth certificate with the new name. But either way, you have to pay for the documentation. And you would need copies of all of your documentation all the way through. So you would need your birth certificate. If you got married, you would need the marriage certificate with your new name and everything proving that. And then if you get a divorce, you need a copy of the divorce decree and the paperwork saying you changed your name. And if you got married again, every time something happened and you changed your name, you would need to have all that documentation. Now, said it would affect primarily women, but it would affect some men. Um, I know uh, a couple of people who have gotten married, and for whatever reason, whether it was um, he had family problems, or she had a more prestigious last name, or sometimes it was just they thought the last name was better. They were going to go with their spouse's name because they liked the name better for whatever reason, or um, you know, there are multiple reasons why that would happen. So that could disenfranchise people. But Republicans don't want to see it that way. They don't see the Republican MAGA voters don't see it that way. What they see is what they've been told is that voter fraud is a massive problem, even though they have only found a handful of cases going back like 15 or 20 years. And the ones they found, for the most part, had already been caught by the systems and things that are in place to prevent that. Now, one thing we really should have is more voter participation. And this is exactly what the Republicans don't want. Um, they want to go through and they want to make it hard for people to vote. They want to change voting times and when mail-in ballots, how you get mail-in ballots and when they can be accessed and when they can be counted and all this. Um, because they want to make it more difficult to vote because Republicans know when the turnout is high, Democrats win. Well, if we had a higher turnout every election, if we had closer to 100% turnout, um, we would have a better idea of what the country actually wants. Now, uh, one of the other things that is not in the SAVE Act, but something Donald Trump wants, and Republicans specifically put it in there because they knew how bad it would be if they put it in, is the no mail-in votes. Donald Trump keeps talking about passing it, and there's going to be no mail-in voting except for those who are actually disabled and those on maybe vacation because he's being generous in the military. Here's the problem with that. That's not up to him to decide. States decide who gets to vote, and whether or not they are mail-in ballots. Now, some states have only done mail-in ballots for a while now. I think Oregon and Washington State are both mail-in only, um, which is fine. And we found during the pandemic when they made it easy to vote, when you had the ballot show up at your front door, all you had to do was take 2 minutes at your kitchen table with a pen, fill it out, sign it, slap your name on it, put it back in, and you had a self-addressed or you had an envelope with that already had postage paid and everything. All you had to do was put it back in your mailbox, and your mailman would pick it up. They found out that was easy, and people actually voted. When you make it difficult, people choose not to show up and not to vote. And that's what Republicans found out. That's why they have done so many things to change uh, early voting access and things like that and mail-in access. A couple of the things they changed here in Iowa. They shrunk early voting by a few days. And then they turned around and they also made it illegal for the Secretary of State or the state auditor, whichever one would handle it. I think it was the Secretary of State to just mail out ballots to every uh, eligible voter in the state. Can't do it now. If you need a ballot, you have to make an effort to go down and get it and sign up and do all of the things. And for some people, um, there are multiple reasons why they can't. They're older, they're elderly, they don't get around as much, and even though the courthouse and those places are um, accessible, it's not always feasible for certain people to do it. And if depending on your situation, maybe you're somebody who is wheelchair bound, who is elderly, um, who needs to rely on one of their children to come take them. Well, then you got to wait for that child to have a day off during the week or take a day off during the week to go down when they have time to go do it. It becomes more of a hassle. The Republicans, they do not want people to have voting access because they know that when people turn up and they vote in numbers, that the Republicans lose. Now, I think you are going to see large numbers of people voting in the midterms. Things are pretty shitty in this country right now, despite what Donald Trump is going to say here in a few hours about the state of the union. He is going to try to gloss it over and glaze it, make him sound like, the perpetual hero and the genius and the best there ever was, and all this. But there's a lot of problems in this country. The economy sucks. The job market sucks. Um, you got ICE agents running around basically being a mini mafia or a Gestapo or secret police, and they're killing American citizens. They're constantly breaking judicial orders. Um, it's not that great around here, and I think people are fed up, and I think they feel, at least some of them have felt duped because they didn't believe us when we said how bad it was going to be if Donald Trump got reelected. It seemed like a pretty cut and dry choice. Now, especially the younger crowd that said, "Oh yeah, you're just being dramatic. It can't be that bad," because they looked back at the Trump years and went, "Well, it wasn't that bad under Trump the first time." And the first 3 years under Donald Trump were not bad, but that was in part because Donald Trump didn't do anything. And when I mean he didn't do anything, I mean he literally did not do anything because he let the economy, for the most part, ride the way Obama had it set up, and it just continued the same trends, and everything was rolling along and was actually doing really, really well. It wasn't until he fucked up COVID that he wrecked the economy. And they forget about that. And Biden is the one who gets the blame for a lot of COVID because the big part of COVID was in 2020, which was the election year and the year we elected Biden. But Biden didn't become president until 2021. And by the time Biden was president, the vaccine was out. So Biden oversaw getting us out of the problems from the pandemic. But in the minds of a lot of people, he got the blame for the height of the pandemic. So we'll have to see how the turnout is in this midterm election coming up. I do not expect Donald Trump's State of the Union to sway a lot of voters to his side. If anything, it will probably end up turning voters against him and actually make the turnout for the midterms even more favor the Democrats over Donald Trump and the Republicans. All right, so that is going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan Podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I'm probably going to be live on TikTok with Trucker T in a while we watch the State of the Union. They suggested a drinking game depending on what Donald Trump says, but if we take a drink every time he lies, we will have alcohol poisoning in short of 10 minutes. And I don't really feel like dealing with that. All right, so that's going to do it for today. I'm going to be back tomorrow with a recap of the State of the Union, as well as I might be a guest over on the Boomer podcast in the next couple of days. Going to see how that plays out, as well as I may do either a TikTok or a YouTube live, probably either tomorrow night, Wednesday night, or Thursday night. It would be the following day's podcast. So keep an eye out for that as well. All right, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. Hope you guys have a great day, and we will be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.